So let's talk about Brazil's 2026 budget. Picture this. You're looking at the numbers, and all of a sudden 14 billion reais in new revenue just appears, kind of out of thin air. Now, the government says it's all about protecting local industries, but critics, they're calling it a political game. So what's the real story behind this fiscal magic trick? Let's get into it.
First off, let's just take a moment to appreciate the scale of this number. 14 billion reais. That is a massive sum of money to just suddenly find to balance the books. It wasn't in the original plan at all, but now it's this absolutely critical piece of the financial forecast, especially as we head into an election year.
And that really brings us to the central question of this whole thing. I mean, if you suddenly need 14 billion reais, where do you get it? The answer, it turns out, reveals a really fascinating and pretty controversial move in the world of fiscal policy.
Okay, so how did we even get here? Well, it started with a problem. The government was staring down a pretty significant hole in its 2026 budget. It was a puzzle that needed to be solved, and it needed to be solved fast.
Here's the dilemma in a nutshell. The goal was to have a healthy budget surplus, right? But the problem was a nearly 21 billion real shortfall that just kind of popped up. And the solution they landed on? A report from the Joint Budget Committee that, almost like magic, projected an extra 14 billion in revenue, all coming from one single place, the import tax.
And this chart really shows you the scale of that move. I mean, look at this. The original projection for import tax revenue was 103 billion. The new projection, 117 billion. That's a jump of almost 14%, and it's all based on a planned tax hike. This is the heart of what critics are calling the fiscal trick.
So, you might be wondering, why the import tax? Why not something else? Well, the choice of tool here is just as important as the amount of money, because the import tax has this very special quality that makes it, well, kind of perfect for this sort of thing.
And here is the secret sauce. The import tax is what's known as a regulatory tax. What that means, in plain English, is that the executive branch can change the rates with a simple decree. No long, messy debate in Congress, no waiting period for it to take effect. It's fast, it's efficient, and, most importantly for this story, it can be done quietly.
I mean, the process is incredibly streamlined. An executive committee analyzes it, a decree gets issued, and boom, the new tax rates are in effect, just like that. It's a seriously powerful tool that lets the government act decisively without having to get into a drawn-out political battle.
So, what's the government's official reason for pulling this powerful lever? They're calling it commercial defense. The argument is that this tax increase is absolutely necessary to shield Brazilian industries, we're talking steel, chemicals, electric cars, from what they call unfair foreign competition, specifically pointing fingers at practices like Chinese dumping.
And this is where the two narratives just completely collide. On one side, you have a story about protecting the national industry. And on the other, you've got a very, very different story about political maneuvering.
Economist Bruno Perini really sums up the critical view with this sharp quote. He doesn't mince words. He argues this isn't about industrial policy at all, but it's actually a clever way to fund something else entirely.
So let's look at these two views right next to each other. The official story is one of economic defense. The critical view, though, says this 14 billion reais isn't for industry at all. It claims it's really destined to fund parliamentary amendments, which is basically funding for projects in lawmakers' districts to keep them happy and secure their political support, right before an election year. And to put that critical view into perspective, just look at this number. The 2026 budget already sets aside almost 41 billion reais for these mandatory amendments. The argument from critics is that this extra 14 billion is being created to sweeten the pot even more, just to make sure the government's allies are all on board.
So the crucial point from the critics is this. For the government, this move is a total win-win. They get the cash they need to secure political loyalty, and because they can do it by decree, there's almost zero political blowback. The economic cost, however, that gets passed on to everyone else.
Which brings us to the most important part of this whole story. Why does any of this matter to you? Because this high-level game of fiscal chess has very real consequences for the prices you pay every single day.
It's pretty simple, really.
When you raise the import tax, imported goods get more expensive. And we are talking about a huge range of products. Everything from your electronics and car parts to chemicals and tons of other goods that are part of the things we buy all the time.
And this impact isn't just a vague idea. You can actually put a number on it.
Market analysts are already projecting that this tax hike, all by itself, could add between 0.5% and a full percentage point to the official inflation rate. That means higher prices right across the board.
So let's just quickly recap this whole conflict. From the official point of view, this revenue helps meet fiscal targets and protects industry. Simple. But from the critical view, it's just another tax hike that hurts the business environment, and it's all for political gain. As Perini puts it, society is just getting more tax in the veins.
So the move has been made in the budget proposal. The pieces are on the board. But this story is far from over. The final details are still being worked out, and you can bet the debate is only going to get louder from here.
After the Joint Budget Committee gave its approval, the budget heads for a final vote in Congress. But the really crucial step, the one to watch, comes in January 2026. That's when an executive committee will define exactly which products will see their import taxes go up and by how much.
This final quote from Bruno Perini really captures the feeling of frustration that a lot of critics, and frankly, a lot of regular people have. It just speaks to this sense of constant fiscal instability, where big tax changes can seem to appear overnight, without any real discussion.
And that leaves us right back where we started, with the ultimate question. Is this 14 billion real maneuver a necessary act to save Brazilian industry? Or is it a clever trick to create a political fund for an election year with all of us footing the bill? Final verdict? Well, that's still very much up for debate.